I'd like to call the April 21st, 2022 Board of Zoning Appeals meeting to order. The chair would request the staff confirmation that the Kansas Open Meeting Act required notice has been properly provided.
We'll ask Shandy to confirm that for us.
Yes, it has.
Next, we'll move on to roll call.
So we have met our required notice of today's meeting, so I will call the roll. New board member Owens.
Here.
Board member Miles.
Here.
Board member Olson.
Here.
Chair Dorsweiler.
Here.
So this board has a quorum, minimum quorum of 3, and we have 4 members in attendance, so we can move on to today's agenda.
Are there any additions or corrections to the March 17, 2022 regular meeting minutes?
I'd make a motion to approve the minutes from March 17th, 2022.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the March 17th, 2022 minutes. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay.
Aye.
Motion carries. Next, we'll move on to new business, which is public hearing on application V22-3. Would the staff like to present?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is an application that's filed by Chad and Rebecca McCary, and the request is a rear yard setback variance of 6 feet from 25 feet to 19 feet, and the request is to allow the construction of a 12 by 14 rear covered deck, and the location of the property is 1275 Eastgate Court, which Dustin has displayed for you on the screen there. We provided quite a bit of background on this addition and this development here just because it had history where it's probably the only time in history that the city of Salina bought an entire subdivision at tax sale. But it was developed, there was streets, water, sewer, detention pond all put in, and the developer simply walked away and didn't pay the taxes or specials or anything, so the city purchased the entire subdivision at a tax sale. And then there were 3 large lots at the south end of the subdivision that were still unsold, and so they were purchased by Mr. Don Allison, and he reconfigured those into 18 single-family building tracts, which is what you see basically south of the south leg of Eastgate Drive. The particular home in question in this application was constructed in 1994, and the development of the surrounding lots occurred shortly thereafter, and in 1997, when the lot to the north developed, it was discovered that the original builder did not correctly pin the corners of this lot, and just as an aside, most builders have a licensed surveyor pin all their lots so they get the corners set correctly, but in this case the builder did it themselves and was off by about 2 feet, so the end result was that the north wall of this building is closer to the north property line than would normally be allowed because the home was offset. In March of this year, we received a building permit application for the construction of a 12-foot by 14 covered deck at the rear of this dwelling. Because a covered deck has a roof covering, it is considered to be an addition to the dwelling, and so therefore covered decks that have to meet the same setback as the principal dwelling, which in the case of a residential lot is 25 feet. The builder and the property owner were given several options. They could reduce the width of the deck to 6 feet, which is not a real practical option. They could construct or utilize an uncovered deck or patio, or the third option was applied to this board for a rear yard setback area to allow the deck cover to encroach into the building setback area. So option 3 was chosen, this application was filed. It was set for a hearing at today's meeting. Adjacent property owners were notified. I think you have an email or letter at your place there from the neighboring property owner to the north. I also had a phone conversation with the owner directly to the west, and they didn't have any concerns about what was being proposed in this case. But the justification for the variance is that due to the deck being located on the west side of the house, a covered feature will improve energy efficiency of the home by providing shade, as there's no trees on the property. So in terms of uniqueness, we just wanted to clarify that this area is a planned development district, and as part of that, the front yard setback requirement was reduced from 25 feet to 20, but the rear yard setback was not modified or changed, and so that 25-foot setback has been in place since this home was built. The items that are unique about this particular development is that although the lots meet the minimum, that is all they do is meet the minimum depth, which is 100 feet. And what we're seeing in most of our post-1970 and 80 subdivisions is you're hardly seeing any subdivisions where the lots are not at least 100 or 130 feet, or 120 to 130 feet deep. So a typical new home constructed today might have a 60 to 70 foot rear yard behind the house, which is plenty of room for outbuildings and covered decks and things, but at 100 feet, this is a shallower lot than most of the subdivisions around it. So staff believes that the shallow lot depth covered with the 42-foot depth of the house is what creates the need for a setback variance here. The other thing we wanted to point out, and I don't know if is this a fixed image, Dustin?
This one is, but we can change.
If we look to the property to the north, you would say, well, gee, that looks like a covered deck at the back of that house, just like this one, and that is correct. But we pointed out in the report, and just wanted to point out for the benefit of the board, that the lot to the north is a corner lot, and if you are on a corner, you have, for setback purposes, 2 front yards, and then you have 2 side yards, one on the south and one on the west. So the only requirement for the home to the north was that that deck could not extend into the 10-foot utility easement at the back, but the difference is the rear yard needs to be 25 feet in depth. That is considered a side yard, and the minimum setback is 7.5 feet. So you can take that into account as you look at this. It looks virtually identical to this home, but the distinction is that it's a corner lot. Now, the applicant states that the covered deck will not cause any adverse effects on the neighbors because it will not obstruct the view of any neighboring homes. It will be built with materials that are be compatible and complement the home and the neighborhood. We did point out that the homes to the north and south of this property have covered decks that are in a similar location, similar dimensions and design. So from that standpoint, staff believes the deck will simply blend in. And as I noted, I did converse with the property owner directly to the west, and they don't have any objection to this deck as proposed. We agree that having a 6-foot covered deck in order to comply with the setback is not really a practical result. A 6-foot deck is not really functional or usable for outdoor living space, and so that is not really a viable option. And so based on that, we would agree that if the 25-foot setback requirement is strictly applied, there would simply be no way to have a covered shade structure at the rear of this home. We would agree that any impacts from this deck would be localized, and so this deck's not going to impact anything that would affect the general public or broader area, and it appears that runoff would primarily be directed to the interior of the lot. It's not close to any neighboring property line. The reason we don't have any building records about the existing deck is that if you build an uncovered patio or deck that's less than 30 inches off the ground, a permit is not required and it doesn't have a setback requirement. But in this case, we're now going to a covered deck, which does require a permit and does have a setback requirement. The only thing I would point out again is that because this is such a shallow lot, with the construction of this deck, we're going to be very close to or at the 35% maximum lot coverage that you can have on a residential lot. And so the question for you as a board is to consider whether the addition of a 12-foot deep shade structure is too much covered area for the size and depth of this lot. And so if you look at the existing circumstances, is there a justification to allow a 12-foot covered deck instead of a mere 6-foot deck? So we have provided on page 8 some alternatives for you. And the first one would be to approve the variance request as requested. You could approve a lesser request, something more than 6 feet, but something less than 12. You could postpone action on this request to a future meeting date if you feel like you need additional information to reach a decision, or you could deny the applicant's request if you don't think findings can be made to support a variance. We requested that the applicant or their contractor provide a little bit more information about the design, materials, and color of the shade structure and the negative impact of being limited to an uncovered deck. And if that information is provided to your satisfaction, then we have recommended 2 conditions on page 9 of the report. And we have attached to the report provided some possible findings in support of approval on the page attached to the staff report. So we do think that this is a shallow and almost substandard lot compared to surrounding subdivisions, and that is the primary reason that we're here looking at a rear yard setback request. And we would agree with the applicant that limiting a covered deck to 6 feet in width is not a practical solution. So with that, we'd be open to any questions that you would have of staff. We have the applicant and I believe the contractor here if you have questions of them.
Are there any questions for staff? Would the applicant like to speak?
Absolutely. My name is Chad McCary, and I've brought my wife, Becky, and the proposed builder, Brandon Doherty. Just a little background on us. We've been residents here since 1997. We're slowly, doing renovations or improving our property. We've lived in this property since March of 2004 and made various improvements to it. This deck is kind of a culmination of our 18 years living there. I'm kind of pre-retirement now, and we're trying to get as much stuff done as possible. Having this deck, my wife, she's got a list that she'd probably have some comments to give to you guys, but we would be very appreciative of consideration for this. Our backyard right now is not while I keep it trim and proper and everything in my house and property neat, the backyard is not really usable for, it's on the west side of the house. It gets the direct sun in the summer months, and so it's you know, it's hard for us to do anything in the backyard except mow. And so far, the deck that is there has constantly needed, you know, just refinishing and everything because it dries out so much in that. But I'll have my wife, Becky, give you some comments.
Can I move this back? I'm probably going to reiterate many of the things that were stated earlier. Our lot is a smaller and shallower lot. Our lot is one of the smallest in the that little subdivision, that development area, compared to homes that are down on Ellsworth or Minneapolis Street. It's not as deep of a lot. We're not adding to the size of our deck. It's going to be the same size as the existing deck is. We just want to cover it. The sun beats down on that side of the house after noon at lunchtime. In the summertime, we can't go out there and enjoy being outside because it's just hot. I can't remember how many times we've replaced the decking material just because the sun just beats up the wood. So we're just wanting to do some improvements, and we're wanting to, nothing is maintenance free, but we're attempting as we get older to make things a little bit more maintenance free. We're in agreement, the 6 foot is pointless. That's more of an awning or a porch. At 2 o'clock, the deck would still be in the full sun. So and in looking at our neighbors, if you pull up the picture showing our north neighbors, the edge of the structure, you can see a sidewalk that runs north and south on our lot. That's about where the end of our deck would be, was where that sidewalk is, right? That sidewalk right there. And you can see that theirs extends out further, and I get the technicality that's a side yard and ours is a backyard, but it's not going to extend out any further than theirs. So, and quite honestly, those neighbors put their structure up for the very same reason that we want to put ours up, is because having that structure, it's amazing how much cooler the inside of your house is when you have that. So those are our main reasons. The neighbor to the west of us is probably the one that will be directly affected the most, because he will look out onto it and he has no problem with it. So we just feel like, you know, our lot is probably an exception in Salina, and we would just request the variance so that we could proceed with a 12-foot by 14-foot covered structure. So, thank you.
Are there any questions of the board of the applicant?
I guess just my question would be, is again, back to the construction and how's the design and materials and how that's going to tie into the house.
Absolutely.
Hey, guys.
If you wouldn't mind
Brandon
stating
Doherty.
your name, thank you.
Brandon Doherty with ProCraft Construction. I'm the one doing the construction of the covered deck, I guess you'd call it. So as of right there, we're doing composite on the decking. There's going to be all decking, aluminum handrail. It's basically Chad and Becky really wanted this to be maintenance free. And we are basically matching exactly to the house. This is going to have aluminum white soffit that the house is right now. It's going to have PVC white fascia around it that's also matching the house. And then on the front side of the gable, you're gonna have matching siding, matching paint, and then the actual roof on it with the shingles is actually matching as well. So I mean, it's gonna blend into the home. It'll match the home, at least on the exterior side of it, and composite decking and just a maintenance-free deck. And that's pretty much it. Those are 6x6 full length 6x6 Russell and Douglas fir posts in wet set concrete brackets. It is way overkill for what it is. So structurally sound, this thing is not going anywhere. It's going to complement the home, maintenance free, and it'll just continue to match the home for the rest of the years. So, anything else?
Nope,
That
thank
good?
you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Is there any additional questions from the board for the applicant?
I have a couple of questions for staff.
Okay.
On the corner lot, there's what we would, consider to be kind of the backyard is a side yard. So where, on that corner lot, where would the backyard be considered? Is it,
On a corner lot, you do not have a backyard. So, I mean, it functions as that, but I mean, I can identify homes. There's one not far from my own residence where literally the backyard behind the home is 8-9 feet deep. And so because it's a corner lot, it has the disadvantage of having the two front yards, which keeps you farther away from the street, but it has the disadvantage of having a shallower yard. So I think in this case, we determined that the deck that's on the neighboring house to the north is as built is 2 feet closer to the west property line than this would be if it were built. And so the distinction is in this case there's a 10-foot easement that runs along the back of the lot, so you can't put a structure or extend a structure into an easement. But the point is that even though the lots look identical, it's just that on a corner lot you don't have the rear yard setback requirement, but there are a number of homes in Salina that are on corner lots that their backyard in fact looks like a side yard. It just doesn't have any depth to it, and it's just to help homes fit better on the lot because they have to be set back from two different streets. And so when you look at it from an aerial view and you're not seeing the street at the top, they're virtually identical. But I mean, a technicality is probably an accurate term for it, but from a zoning application, the lot to the north has a front yard on Eastgate Drive, a front yard on Eastgate Court, and it has two side yards. And so you can call that a backyard, but for zoning purposes, it's not a rear yard. So that's the distinction. So the house to the north has no rear yard, and the McCrary's house has a rear yard, as does the lot that backs up to theirs on Courtney.
my other question is on looking at the plat, the dimensions. You said that, I believe 100 foot is the minimum.
In the R1 district, the minimum platted depth for a lot is 100 feet. And so these meet the minimum, but that is a minimum requirement, but it is fairly unusual because in most subdivisions that have been platted since the early to mid 1970s, you'll rarely find anything less than 120 or 125 feet in platted depth. And so what this was some larger lots that were laid out for multifamily development, and there were 3 lots there, and Mr. Allison turned them into 18 lots that we'll call small or modest-sized lots compared to most lots in town. The other thing that's unique is that those streets, 2 streets there are private streets, they're not public streets. And so you've got the big drainage ditch to the south, and so this, to lay that out, this little subdivision has higher density and houses closer together and smaller lots than most of the surrounding area. So if you look, like, you look at the lots on Rickey Circle to the south there, and you look at the distance from the back of those homes to their rear property line, those are much deeper than what you're seeing on Eastgate Court to the north.
So in this case where we've kind of got the cul-de-sac and it's a little wider than the rest of the right-of-way, with that one dimension being at 91.29 feet, if we were to, plat this today, would you consider that to be substandard? I mean,
We
one
would-
side's 100, one side's 90, it's kind of an odd-shaped lot.
We would measure it more toward the midpoint, but since the north dimension there has the 100 feet, we usually don't on a cul-de-sac. When we're looking at lot width and depth, we're going to be looking at the midpoint of the lot, and it's got an average depth, but if that north line was not 101 feet, then this would not meet the 100-foot requirement. But the fact that you have the cul-de-sac there, you've got 2 coming off of that are 90 and 91, but we would be looking at the north line there to see if there's a 100-foot depth.
Further questions?
Are there any additional questions for the staff or the applicant? If not, we'll go to public forum. Is there anybody from the public that would like to comment on the application?
We do not have anyone on Zoom.
Thank you. Is there a motion from the board regarding this application?
I would make a motion to approve application V22-3.
I second approval.
It's been moved and seconded.
Does that include the 2 conditions on page 9?
Sorry, let me look back at page 9. Yes, with the conditions as listed on page 9.
So we need a motion to modify your original motion since it
Yeah.
was seconded.
Okay, so I would make a motion to modify the initial motion to add the proposals on page 9.
Is there a second to the motion to modify the original motion?
I second that.
All in favor to modify the original motion, say aye.
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 Motion carries. Now we'll move on to, we have a motion and a second now. So now we need to vote on the modified motion. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Motion carries.
So for Mr. Doherty's benefit, their action today allows us to release a building permit for those as proposed. So you should be looking to get contacted by Building Services about picking that permit up.
Is there any unfinished or other business to come before the board?
Just the thing that we would let you know is that we have 3 applications that have been filed for your May meeting, and that occurs on May 19th. And then the other thing I mentioned to the chair, but would mention to the other board members, is that Mr. Cale Sharp has changed his address from residing in the city limits to out in the county. And as the bylaws for the board require all the members to be city residents, Mr. Sharp will no longer be eligible to serve. So we briefly almost had 5 members, and now we'll be back to 4. So it'll be Ms. Miles, Mr. Dorsweiler, Olson, and Owens, but Mr. Sharp cannot fill out his term because he's relocated out of the city, so.
Thank you. We'll now move on to public forum. Is there anybody that would like to speak to the board? If
We
not,
have no one on Zoom.
thank you. If not, is there a motion for adjournment?
I would make a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion carries. Meeting adjourned.